You'll hear people say that they travel full-time for about $2,500 a month. And on the surface, that sounds completely doable. But here's the problem. We're not traveling full-time yet. We're in the planning stage right now, and before we make that jump, we want to know if that number is actually realistic or if it just sounds good on YouTube. Because this isn't just a fun idea for us. This is something we're seriously considering for retirement. And we're working with a real budget, not a flexible one. We're trying to stay somewhere in that $2,000 to $2,500 range. And if that doesn't work, we need to know that now. But instead of guessing, we're starting with what we already have. We just came off 5 back-to-back cruises from January 3rd through February 8th. And that gave us something most people don't start with. Real numbers, not estimates, not averages, not what someone else said, our actual spending. And even in that controlled environment, the numbers didn't behave the way a monthly budget suggests. Because the reality is, full-time travel doesn't happen in clean, even months. Some months are cheap and some months are not even close. Because here's the truth. Some months are cheap and some months will completely break your budget. And nobody shows you that part. Can you average $2,500 over time? And that's what this channel is going to test. We're going to take what we already know, what we're learning, and what we experience moving forward and figure out if this actually works. So if you want to follow real numbers, not guesses, subscribe because we're going to build this step by step. So before we go any further, I want to show you something real because I'm not guessing here and I'm not just repeating what other YouTubers say. From January 3rd through February 8th, we did 5 back-to-back cruises. Not theory, not spreadsheets, actual travel. And here's where this gets interesting, because if you just look at those cruises, you'd assume this is expensive. It wasn't. Let me show you the actual numbers. The Sun Princess was $740, but we got $400 on board credit. So really, it was $340. Radiance was $290 total, and $30 of that was actually an upgrade to a balcony. Carnival Horizon was $500, and again, we got $200 on board credit, so it actually net cost us $300. Liberty was $248, and Jewel was $538. So before anyone says it, yes, those were casino comp cruises. And that matters because this is exactly where people get this wrong. They think either, oh, that doesn't apply to me, or that's not real travel pricing. And before you write this off as that's just casino comps, that thinking is exactly why people overpay for travel, because every experienced traveler has a system to reduce their costs. They're not magic, they're not free, and they're not random. They're intentional. They're a system. And part of that is what we're testing on this channel. How do you take strategies like this and combine them with things like points and miles and cheaper destinations and actually make a full-time travel budget work? Flights, hotels, transportation, and that's the part that most people fail. And also, these numbers still matter because even with comps, you still have to manage everything around it. So when you're actually looking at those numbers, that's not luxury travel pricing. That starts to look manageable. But here's where most people mess this up. They stop right there. They say, see, travel is cheap. It's not. Because cruises are only one part of the equation. Every time you get off of a ship, you still have to live somewhere. And for us, hotels, covered. All paid with points. We stayed 5 nights while we were on this trip between cruises. The Hyatt Place Fort Lauderdale twice, actually. Candlewood Suites at the Miami Airport, Andaz Miami Beach, Holiday Inn Express in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the Hyatt House in Orlando. Flights, same thing, all paid for with points. Lubbock to Fort Lauderdale to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico back home to Lubbock, Texas. And no, we didn't start with that. We built it over time. We didn't always have a lot of points. And we're not going to go deep into that on this video, but that's another piece of the system that we're building. And we'll break it down step by step. So again, if you stop right here, this looks easy, and that's exactly where people get misled. One of our biggest expenses was not even the cruises. It wasn't even the flights and the hotels. It was getting between them. Ubers, transfers, trains, $255 just for moving around. And here's the part that nobody talks about. None of those charges really felt that big. $12, $15, $30. Okay, the $50 one was a little high. But overall, they felt harmless. But when you stack them all, they don't stay very small. And that's where budgets quietly fall apart. Not the big things, it's the small things stacked together. Because when people say we travel for $2,500 a month, they're usually thinking about the big stuff, the flights, the hotels, the cruise. They're not thinking about getting from the airport to the hotel, to the port, back to the airport. But that's real travel, and that real travel comes with real movement, and movement costs money. So let's start with why that number sounds so believable. $2,500 is a clean number. It feels manageable. It feels possible. $2,500 feels simple because it hides everything behind it. Most people are not actually spending exactly $2,500 every month. They're averaging. But they don't always explain that part. They show the cheap apartment, the low-cost country, the perfect scenario, but they don't always show the expensive transitions. Now let's talk about where this actually breaks. Flights. Flights are the biggest disruptor. One flight can be $800, $1,200, even more, and that's half your monthly budget gone. Repositioning, moving from one place to another. Even if both places are cheap, the movement between them are not. Cruises. Cruises can actually be a great value, but they don't fit into a clean monthly budget either. If you take a cruise, it covers multiple weeks at once. Sometimes it crosses over months, so what month do you count it in? The month you book it, the month you take it, break it down by days to break it down into the months? There's a lot of hidden costs too. Insurance, your internet, phone, local transportation I already touched on, food and the different prices all around the world. These don't show up in simple budgets, but they absolutely show up in reality. If you've ever looked at travel budgets and thought, something about this doesn't quite add up, comment below and tell me, what's the one expense that always blows your travel budget? All right, let's talk about where people get this wrong, because this isn't where the confusion actually starts. They think in months, the January budget, the February budget, the March budget. But travel doesn't work like that. Travel happens in waves. You might have one month where you barely spend anything, and then the next month you book your flights, you pay for a cruise, you move locations, and suddenly that one month looks completely blown. But it's not that you overspent, it's that your timing doesn't match your budget. That's the difference that people miss. Here's another big one. People compare their expected budget to someone else's best month. You'll hear, we lived in Thailand for $1,200, or we stayed in Mexico for $1,500. And those numbers might be real, but they're not the full picture, because what you're not seeing is the flight to get there, the move to the next place, that expensive transition month. You're comparing your total cost to their cheapest moment. This one is subtle, but it's a big deal. Living somewhere and getting there are not the same cost. You might be able to live somewhere for $1,500 a month, but what did it cost you to get there? An $800 flight? A $1,200 flight? That matters. But most people blend those together, or worse, they ignore the movement cost completely. And that's how the numbers start to look better than they really are. Here's another part no one talks about, the in-between days. You check out of a hotel, your next place isn't ready yet, or you have an early flight, or you get back from a cruise. You need a ride, you need a meal, you need somewhere to sit until you can check into the next place. That's not in the budget, but it's a very, very real cost. Those half days, those transition days, pad up a lot faster than people think. And this might be the biggest one. People assume consistency in a lifestyle that is not consistent. They assume every month will look the same. Every cost will be predictable. Every destination will add up perfectly, but that's not how travel works. Some months are efficient, some months are very messy. Some months you're just trying to get from one place to the next, and those months can break your average fast. So when people say we travel for $2,500 a month, what they really mean is some months are way under and some months are way over, and they're just really hoping that it will average out. The problem is most people never track it long enough to see if it actually does average out. So here's what we're doing differently, because we're not trying to make this look good. We're trying to make this real. We're not here to prove that $2,500 works. We're here to test it, if it actually holds up. Because there's a big difference between something sounding possible and something being sustainable. And most people never test that long enough to find out. Second, we're tracking everything, not just the big stuff, everything. Flights, cruises, hotels, transportation, food, random expenses, those $12, $15, $30 charges. And for us, we're going to use an app called Travel Spend. I just learned about it, so we're just testing it. Not because the app matters, but because the tracking does. You can use a spreadsheet, which is what I've used up until now, an app, pen and paper, it doesn't matter. If you're not tracking it, you're guessing. And we're not estimating. We're not rounding. We're not saying it's about this much. We're using real numbers. Third, we're not relying on one type of travel, because that's another mistake people make. They build a budget around one scenario and assume it applies everywhere. We're testing different models. Cruises, we'll be going to Southeast Asia where it's cheap, Europe where it's not, slow travel, fast travel, because each one of them behave differently, and we want to see how they balance each other. Cheap regions might offset the expensive flights. Cruises might cover weeks at a time. Slow travel might reduce movement costs, but we're not assuming that. We're going to test it. And this is the biggest difference. We're not chasing a perfect month. We're watching the average over time, because one month might be $1,500 and another one might be $3,500. And the question is, where does that land over time? Because that's what determines whether this actually works. And this matters. We're not just going to show you the easy months, the cheap countries, the perfect situations. We're going to show you the expensive months, the messy transitions, the ones that don't go as planned, because those are the ones that actually will decide your budget. So this isn't about making travel look affordable. It's about finding out if it actually is. And if it's not, we'll show you that too. So now we get to the real question. After looking at all of this isn't really about a number. It's about how that number behaves over time. Because it's not about having a cheap month, and it's not about avoiding expensive ones. It's about whether those two can balance each other well enough to hold. And for us, we're aiming to stay between $2,000 and $2,500 a month. $2,500 is the ceiling, not the target. So the question becomes, can lower cost stretches offset the heavier ones enough to stay inside that range? Or does the reality of travel, movement, flights, timing quietly push that number higher? Because this isn't something you see in a single month. It doesn't show up in one trip. This only shows up when you look at it over time. You might feel like you're doing great because one stretch is under budget, but one flight, one transition, one expensive move can erase that margin fast. And that's the part most people don't see until they're already in it. So the goal isn't perfection, it's consistency. Not hitting $2,500 every month, but staying close enough over time that it actually works. And that's what we're testing, not what sounds possible, but what actually holds up. And we're not waiting until we go full time to figure this out. We're already testing it. We take multiple trips throughout the year, and we treat each one of them like a data point. Every flight, every hotel, every cruise gets tracked, so we can see what actually happens. In fact, we leave tomorrow for a 6-day trip, which includes a 5-night cruise. And that trip is part of this test. Real numbers, real movement, real decisions. So we're not just guessing when we go full time. If you've watched my channel, Cruise Casino Secrets, you already know we don't guess. We track, we test, and we adjust. And that's exactly what we're doing here. In the next videos, we're going to be sharing our exact rules. No cheating. Cruise versus land costs, biggest budget breakers, and real numbers as we go. So I'm curious, if you had to guess, do you think we'll stay under $2,500 or go over? Drop your guess in the comments, under or over. And if you want to see how this actually plays out, make sure you're subscribed because we're going to show the real numbers as we go. Next, we're going to break down the exact rules we're using so that there's no guessing and no cheating. Then we'll compare cruise costs versus land costs and where each one actually wins. And we'll show you the biggest budget breakers that quietly can push people over their budget. And most importantly, we're going to share the real numbers as this unfolds. Because this isn't about guessing, it's about seeing what actually works. Real numbers, no guessing. All right, we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.